Apple just announced that Logic is coming to iPads. And as someone who uses Logic on an almost daily basis, I have a few questions, concerns, problems, potentially things that my head immediately jumps to when I think of bringing Logic to an iPad. Potential problem number one is third party plugins. Third party plugins are essential to any DAW. Bringing this to iPad means we need those third party plugins on a completely different operating system. If I want to take a project that I was working on my laptop and bring it over to my iPad, I need to have those same exact plugins over on the iPad, or else I can't hear those sounds unless I freeze it on my laptop before bringing it to the iPad. And vice versa, if I have a plugin on my iPad that I don't have on my laptop, I can't use it on there. This is the same exact problem you have when you're trying to work on a project between two different computers that don't have the same exact plugins installed. Apple says that Logic for iPad will support audio units, just like Logic on macOS does. However, those audio units have to come through the App Store. You can't just bring a plugin from your computer onto your iPad. You have to wait for the developer of that plugin to release it on the App Store, which who knows if that will ever happen on whatever your favorite plugins are. Speaking of plugins, this brings us to number two, and that is plugin tiles. One of the notable features of Logic for iPad is these plugin tiles, which look suspiciously similar to a different DAW. And I have two thoughts about this. First of all, will third-party plugins be able to integrate and have a plugin tile and have macros set into that? And also, second of all, are we ever going to get that on macOS, or is that just like a purely iPad thing? Because that would be very nice to have on desktop. Number three is the subscription. Logic for iPad and also Final Cut are under subscription instead of a one-time purchase. The fact that Logic and Final Cut were both a one-time purchase was one of the biggest reasons that people often used Final Cut in Logic, because they didn't have to continue paying on a monthly basis. The fact that iPad versions of these programs do require a subscription is a little bit concerning. Hopefully, Apple has seen how people have responded to other companies who tried to switch to subscriptions and won't try to pull that for the macOS versions of Logic and Final Cut. Hopefully, they just keep it as a one-time purchase and they know not to take away stuff that people already have. Number four is how much is going to be different between these two versions of the programs on macOS and on iPad. Logic for iPad is getting all these new sounds. Are we ever going to get that on the macOS version of Logic, or is the iPad version and the desktop version just going to have things that the other one doesn't have? It almost kind of feels like the desktop versions of Logic and Final Cut are getting a little neglected in the wake of developing these iPad versions. Is there going to be huge feature differences? Are these plugin tiles only going to be on iPad? Is iPad going to have sounds that the desktop version is not going to have? Is desktop ever going to have features that the iPad version is not going to have? How much is going to be different between these? And also, every difference makes it less compatible with each other. And that leads me into number five, kind of the final takeaway of all this. I'm a little worried that Logic for iPad is going to become a Logic Lite. It'll fall in between GarageBand and Logic for macOS. It'll be in its own little middle ground and kind of work with both, but also kind of be bad at the goals of each. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the new Logic for iPad, and I guess also by extension Final Cut for iPad. A lot of those apply over. Time will tell how good it ends up being.